right, so I'm standing between you folks and lunch. So we'll see how this works out. I'll see how quick people manage this. We've talked a few times this morning about 10x and moonshots and so on. I'm going to talk about how do you organize for this new world? How do you organize for a 10 times bigger outcome? And give you some sense of it. I've been building out Singularity University for the last 6 years or so. Before this, I was the head of innovation at Yahoo, and I have a long background. I actually ran a digital agency for a while back in the late 90s. This is why I'm bald, and I think many of you realized that particular analogy. So we are based at NASA in Silicon Valley. We got initial funding to get going 6 years ago. And this curve of Moore's law, growing exponentially, is something that we live off. The idea that when you turn something into an information-enabled environment, we've seen it in computing now for 50 or 60 years, that the price performance of computing doubles every 18 months. What we are now seeing is that same curve is happening across a whole series of other technologies. Biotech, robotics, artificial intelligence, neuroscience, all of these technologies are now moving at the same pace and speed as Moore's law at different parts of that curve. We've brought together many of the world's leading experts across these areas to talk about what are the cutting edge breakthroughs, who's seeing what's being done in the labs, who are the top researchers and thought leaders across the different organizations. And our mission statement is to find a new generation of leaders and point them at the biggest problems in the world, because for the first time ever, advanced technology can scale to meet grand challenges. And we've just never been able to do that before in history. And so we find this a particularly exciting time, because we can essentially charge and challenge and inspire young people to take advantage of the inherent scaling in some of these technologies and go attack some of the biggest problems in the world today. The most interesting attribute of our model, this is a photograph from our curriculum planning meetings. Because we're focused on such fast-moving technologies, we actually bring our faculty together about 6 times a year, and every time we convene our faculty, we revisit every lecture. We've had to develop almost a real-time curriculum development mechanism to keep pace with this pace of change. In biotech, for example, we've had 4 major breakthroughs just in the last year, and so trying to keep pace of all that is quite a challenge. We have now about 2,000 alumni in 85 or so countries. We have more alumni from Brazil than pretty much any other country in the world. Do we have any Brazilian alumni here? Right, you can spot them. They look a little sleepless. Our nickname is called Sleepless University. I don't know why we have so many Brazilian alumni, except that you Brazilians are crazy. That's the only conclusion I can reach about that. And so we've talked today about how we're digitizing the world, and I think Andy gave us a great frame of how dramatically that's happening. And I want to talk for a second about how disruptive this is, because in terms of organizations, we now have to live in a world that's constantly being disrupted. All of our old organization structures are set up to operate in a predictable and scalable world, not in a disruptive world, right? And so we have to re-architect how we think about organization structures. And here's the best analogy we've found to describe what's happening today. Some of you are old enough to remember film photography, right? You're operating off a material substrate. It costs about $1 a photograph for the film and the processing and so on. You can only carry so much film around. You're operating from a scarcity environment, right? You frame every shot carefully. We take courses in photography to optimize every shot. When you make the shift from the material substrate and you go to the digital photography, 2 things happen. The first thing that happens is the marginal cost of an extra photograph goes to 0. Right? Now you can take 1 billion more photographs, and we do. And now the domain explodes. And so these 2 things have us go from a scarcity model to an abundance model. Right? In 1996, there were about 3/4 billion film photographs processed around the world that year. Today, we're uploading per day 3/4 billion photographs to Facebook, Instagram, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is a very profound shift where you drop the cost to 0 and you explode the domain. And when you're operating from an abundance perspective, you have different types of problem sets. In a scarcity model, you're trying to optimize around each individual shot. In an abundance model, you're trying to think, how many copies do I have of all my photographs? How many different devices are they on? Did I share them? What did my kid do with the chip? Et cetera, et cetera. A whole other set of problems. And this explosion, of course, once you have something in an information-based environment, you can apply modeling, machine learning, AI algorithms, simulations, correlations, and that drives the pace of change even faster. And this kind of explosion from the material world to the digital world that we saw in photography is essentially happening across all of these domains. I'll take neuroscience as an example. Here's an old architecture. We've not had an upgrade in our brains in about 50,000 years. Right? And our old version of the brain was this image on the right-hand side. We simply don't know what's going on in there. Today, because of imaging, we can spot a single neuron firing in your brain in real time. And what that gives us, and you know this very well from your world, it gives us feedback loops. Right? And now we can do something and see how the brain responds and do interesting things. And what happens when you take all of these all of these extraordinary new technologies and apply it to this old organ that we still don't know fundamentally how it works? We still don't know why we sleep, for example. Right? And today you can get $100 headsets that give you a pretty good perspective as to what's happening, what frequency of brain waves do you have in your head. The one on the right there is used by Stephen Hawking, the physicist in a wheelchair. He thinks of the word, and the device detects the word and reads it out for him. Right? Now we're getting to that full mind-reading thing. And now you can wear headsets that allow you to simulate exactly what's going on. Luigi here has one of those headsets. His brain really needs no activation of any kind, but he has one anyway. Right? And here's a team out of Japan that is taking this to another level. You sleep in an MRI machine, and as you sleep, they're trapping the images coming off your visual cortex, storing them, and they want to play your dreams back to you the next day. Right? My wife wants to get her hands on this. I'm not so happy about that. And so we're going to start asking and answering some interesting questions about where we go with this. This is probably the cutting edge of the field being worked on at MIT and at Stanford. This is called optogenetics. They've engineered a light-sensitive brain cell, a neuron. They've distributed the neuron in the localized part of the brain of a mouse. They've put an optical fiber in. They've turned on the switch. The neurons fire. The mouse becomes Uber, wherever the neurons are. In this case, the neurons were placed in the part of the brain where compassion sits. This was funded by the Dalai Lama. And so the mouse becomes uber compassionate. Right? You can make the mouse turn left, turn right, get hungry, get angry, get sad. And essentially, this is essentially mind control. Right? And this is already in mice. Very Frankensteinian possibilities. On the other hand, it could be a real treatment path for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, and it's already in mice. And this whole field is only 3 years old. This is how fast this is all moving. We have an old word for this, by the way. We call it marketing. All of you are trying to influence users, so when they see a Coke, they get thirsty. What we've done is information enabled it down to the biological level, and that will explode the domain. Right? And so the same kind of explosion we're seeing across all of these. I don't have time to go into all of them, but you can kind of get a sense of where this is going. But these are also having a hugely disruptive effect, because as we information enable the world, we are not set up for this pace of change. All the technologies are all very sexy, but all the structures that we use to run the world, our politics, our civics, our legal systems, healthcare, education, intellectual property, you name it, all designed for a world a few hundred years ago, not for today, right? And we have today a very visceral reaction to these technologies and how we're dealing with this information age. We saw a couple of examples of the Google car. I'm going to play you a little video. This is what it's like to ride in a Google car for the first time. Just let's play, see what this sounds like.
The Hans team will never believe this.
Oh my goodness. Go is the right word. Holy shit.
Sorry, there's a little swearing in this.
Holy shit. There's no fucking hands on that wheel. Oh my god. What?
It's driving itself.
All right, you get the general idea. That scream, right? That's the visceral scream of humanity meeting advanced technology, right? Because the first time you get into that car and it takes off at high speed around the obstacle course, and it's actually moving faster than you could drive it, and there's nobody in the driver's seat, you freak out, right? And what we're seeing around the world today is the world is freaking out on this information paradigm. We are simply not able to manage this. This is the Prime Minister of Turkey from a few months ago. A smart, intelligent, thoughtful, experienced guy making a completely ridiculous comment about technology, right? This is his scream, essentially. In the US, we're trying to use old structures to address new problems. And there's simply an impedance mismatch. You cannot manage this new world in this old way. And so coming at it from a top-down perspective simply doesn't work. And so we have to totally re-architect how we think about that. This is the Fourth Amendment, the right to privacy in the US Constitution. We've been showing this image for 6 years, saying, hey, technology is delivering us to a point where this is going to be the case. Now we're there. Right? The right to privacy is essentially washed away in the US. A fundamental pillar of American society has disappeared with no public discourse about it. Right? I'm Canadian, I don't have an expectation of privacy anyway, but if you're American, this is a pretty bad place to be. Right? And how do we update the Constitution with the political climate that's there today? It's not possible. And the Constitution is the software that runs a country, and you have to be able to update it occasionally. The patent system I mentioned, fundamentally broken. High-tech companies are spending more on R&D, more on patent litigation than on R&D. And that's a pretty bad place to be. And I mentioned our curriculum planning meetings. Even though we have the leading researchers and scientists in the world coming to teach, we can't become an official accredited state-sanctioned university, because to do that, you have to fix your curriculum and not change it. Right? And it brings about the general problem of how does any regulatory framework keep pace as technology is accelerating away from us. And so we're seeing this fundamental issue. And from a business perspective, what we're finding is when you information enable in industry, you see a huge drop in revenues. The newspaper business, massive, almost a 10x drop in revenues when the internet finally hit. The media business, many of you are familiar with this stuff. Note that some people call themselves the media industry, but you're trying to sell the actual media. But actually, it's an information service, and when you can go from source to destination, all of the intermediaries disappear, and there's a huge deflationary dynamic that takes place. Netflix versus Blockbusters, same fundamental paradigm of streaming versus rental of DVDs. And here's how badly we get it wrong. We've seen exponential growth in mobile phones over the last decade, going from 100 million back in the year 2000, doubling every 2 years to now almost, 6 billion out in the world. Vinod Khosla, the famous venture capitalist and founder of Sun Microsystems, went back and looked at how did the mobile expert analysts in the industry predict the growth of mobile phones. And in 2002, when he looked at Gartner, Forrester, Jupiter, McKinsey's, and looked at their predictions, he found they predicted 16% year-on-year growth. Then it went up 100%, so they were off by a factor of 3 or so. And in 2004, they predicted 14%. Then it doubled again. In 2006, they predicted 12%, doubled again. Okay? And in 2008, unable to spot the fact that you've had a doubling pattern 3 times in a row, their prediction was 10%. Right? The experts in the field will always project linearly, even when the curve shows them otherwise. And from 10%, it actually doubled again. Right? Now, how much more wrong can you be from 10% to 100%? You're 10 times off. And you're the mobile phone expert that all the industries and big companies and governments are relying on for predictions. And he was able to show this wasn't just in mobile phones. It was in oil pricing. It was in network bandwidth. Wherever you have that exponential curve, we always project linearly. This is the cognitive gap that we have as human beings that we're trying to solve. If I take 30 linear steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 30, I'll get out to the lobby. And you're all very good at seeing where would I be 1/3 of the way, where would I be 2/3 of the way in that progression, right? We're very good at linear extrapolation. But if I take 30 exponential steps and I double at each step, 2, 4, 8, 16, at step 30, I'm at 1 billion. I'm 26 times around the world, which is a little further than the lobby. And it's very hard to estimate where am I 1/3 of the way or 2/3 of the way in that progression. And so we see this exponential curve, and we miscalculate it all the time. So early on, it looks linear. 3D printing has been around for 35 years. But when you're doubling, and it's been doubling every kind of 20 months or so in its price performance, right? But when you're doubling from 0.001 to 0.002 to 0.004, nobody notices. It takes a long time to get to 1. Then you get 2, 4, 8, 16, the thing takes off, and we go, oh, black swan. And that's the gap. And now more and more of the world, driven by this information paradigm, is operating on this exponential curve. And so we need to adjust our thinking and be able to calculate on this new curve because of this. The final part of this, and I think maybe the biggest, most extraordinary pattern that's happening, is that because these technologies are dropping in cost so incredibly, we have an incredible democratization taking place. A farmer in Africa with a smartphone has more information power in his or her hands than Clinton did when he was president. That's a pretty profound thing to be able to say, that we go from the most powerful person in the world to one of the poorest in a generation, right? And incredibly inspiring, because they will do things with it that we can't imagine. The M-Pesa phenomena in Kenya, the mobile-to-mobile payment system, is now almost 50% of GDP, right? And extraordinary things are happening. This is Emiliano Cargiman. He's Argentinian, one of our alumni. He's been voted by our faculty the most likely to actually impact 1 billion people. And he's creating nanosatellites about this big around, and he's floating a cluster of them up into space. Once he has his full cluster, he'll be able to provide real-time video anywhere on Earth to about a 1 meter resolution, right? That will have some interesting consequences and some really amazing apps that you can build on this. His first 2 satellites have already launched. He's going to throw up his entire network of satellites for less than $200 million. Think of that cost compared to the billions of dollars spent on Iridium and Global Star, et cetera, 15, 20 years ago. I mentioned neuroscience. You can get these kind of $100 headsets. This is one of our other alumni, Will Henschel. He's on the right there in the photograph. I'm on the left, and that's my brain on the headset, the readout from my brain. Will is one of the guitarists for the Eurythmics, the band from the 1980s. And he's composing music that when you play the music, it puts your brain into a focused state of being. So there's my brain before and after. You can see my brain is flooded with alpha waves, which is the focused deep, if I need to do creative work, or if I'm doing software development or working on a spreadsheet, that's the frequency of brainwave that I want, right? Think about how big this, now he's getting 5 hours per user per website visit. Nobody's ever heard of a website that gets 5 hours average per user per session, right? He's getting that level, because you can, once you turn it on, you're in the zone, and you're working, you're creating, off you go. This is a multi-billion-dollar idea, right? And he's doing that with a Mac and a $100 headset. Now, we talked about Red Bull. If you're Red Bull, you should be a little worried about this. People will start drinking less Red Bull, less coffee, right? So we will start to see these orthogonal impacts of technology in a pretty interesting way. So how do we organize for this new world is something I've been looking at a lot. So when I was at Yahoo, I was building out their incubator, and I realized when you try and do disruptive innovation in a big company, the immune system of the organization will come and attack you, right? It's a biological entity. And all of our organization structures are built to withstand change and withstand risk. And here we're saying, hey, go do something totally crazy, not set up for it. And so now I'm seeing this new breed. I'm writing a book on this called Exponential Organizations. It's due out in the fall, where we're seeing new organization structures that are actually achieving about a 10x performance benchmark compared to their peers. How many of you are familiar with Quirky? Quirky is a consumer products company like Procter & Gamble or Johnson & Johnson, et cetera. If you're a Procter & Gamble, it takes you about 300 days to go from new idea through development, et cetera, to the product being sold on a shelf in Walmart. Quirky does that same process, new idea to shelf, 29 days in Walmart. Okay? Unbelievable. How do you compete with that? And we're seeing all of these new organizations, and what we're learning how to do with these new organization structures is, rather than trying to own an asset or own a workforce and then sell access to it, which is how we've built all of our organizational structures to maximize and sell scarcity, right? We're certainly really actually now flipping it around, and rather than owning it, we're accessing it. Uber does not own its own cars, right? Airbnb does not own its own rooms, and they're able to tap into this excess capacity. If you own a car, it sits empty 93% of the time. And so if you can tap into that excess supply, you can do something really interesting with it. Kaggle is a social network of about 120,000 of the world's top data scientists. And if you try and hire data scientists, A, they're hard to find, B, they're harder to hire, and they're even harder to manage, right? They have weird habits, and they speak geek, and so on. You put a problem up on Kaggle that you want to get solved, and 120,000 data scientists around the world try and solve it. The most dramatic example here is Allstate. Allstate Insurance has their claims algorithm. They've been working for 60 years on this algorithm. So they put it up on this platform, said, how close will this community come to our algorithm? In 3 days, the algorithm was beaten. And by the end of the 6 weeks of the contest, it was 270% better, right? Not 5%, 10%. It was almost 3 times better than their best. And that's a huge cost savings to them, right? Massive, massive thing. And so look at TED. Kind of a nice high-end conference, plateaued a little bit. Chris Anderson takes it over, releases the TED Talks for free, creates the TEDx phenomena, and in 4 years, it's a global media brand. We've never seen a brand come that fast, that quickly. So he's turning the organization inside out to do it. So here are some of the attributes of what are constitute these new breed of organizational structures. And I've actually come up with a formula for this. The first is a lot of them, all these new org structures have a massive transformative purpose. Right? Google, organize the world's information. Ours is go impact 1 billion people positively using technology. Coke has even gotten one, open happiness. So they're migrating their brands to this big aspirational transformative purpose that binds the community together. Here's a weak one. This is a mission statement. Anybody know which company this is? Shape the future of the internet, unprecedented value, customers, blah, 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 blah. This is actually Cisco, right? Not very inspiring. What if they said, connect everyone, everywhere, all the time? That's all they'd have to say, and everybody would get excited about working for Cisco. And so this is what our suggestion is. And so you create a power of pull, you attract talent, you help drive community, et cetera, et cetera. And then there are 5 externalities that help drive and leverage that scale. One is staff on demand or access to a community that you can leverage, leveraging the crowd or leveraging your community, algorithms or data science, assets on demand, right? You don't own your own assets. And engagement. Engagement meaning gamification, incentive prizes, loyalty programs, that kind of thing. Here's the kicker economic basis for this new breed of organization structure. If you think about how we manage our organizations, all businesses, you manage your cost of supply, you manage your cost of demand, right? And what the internet did, for the first time ever, it allowed us to drop the cost of demand exponentially. Online marketing, referral marketing, if you get a viral loop going, it goes straight to 0. And so all of the geeks are out trying to figure out how do you get that viral loop going and create metrics and engagement in that way. What these new organizations driven by technology are doing for the first time ever is we're dropping the cost of supply exponentially. Right? Google is maybe one of the first to do that. They have no cost of supply. The cost of supply is just indexing all of the world's web information. If you're quirky, you have 600,000 inventors submitting ideas to you. You have no R&D costs, no product development costs, or very little. And so these new companies are actually dropping the cost of supply. And when you can drop the cost of demand and the cost of supply, it explodes. That's why we're seeing multi-billion-dollar valuations for Airbnb, Uber, WhatsApp, et cetera, because you generate some excitement on the marketing end, and it hits your supply and it hits your demand. Amazing possibilities. And this is the set of 5 internal attributes for how do you manage those externalities. New interfaces to deal with it. TED has very specific interfaces for how to deal with their TEDx events, very strict rules, right? Quirky has very specific rules and mechanisms to manage their community. It's almost a form of intellectual property in this new world. The second is dashboards, real-time metrics, and also people management on the internal side. Technology allows us to use things like the Google method called OKRs, objectives and key results. And all of the hyper-growth companies, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, are all using this OKR methodology to do this. Third is experimentation. We talked a bit about this. Constantly testing. The marketplace is changing so fast that you have to constantly be in tune with it. You have to constantly test and experiment with what's going on. Fourth, autonomy. In a fast, responsive world, you have to give all of your team full autonomy to operate at the edges and react to different situations. And the fifth one is obvious, pretty social technologies, activity streams, social media, file sharing, etc. What we found is if you implement a combination of 3 or 4 of combination of these external factors and these internal factors, you'll get that 10x performance benchmark. And we found that we were able to do that. So our advice to large companies, and this is something you can think about how you talk to your clients and as agencies, is first, you have to have your leadership aware that this radical change is happening, right? And so this is a critical one. This is an event that we do at Deloitte. They bring Fortune 500 CEOs to us 4 days at a time, twice a year. And we asked them beforehand, what awareness do you have of these breakthroughs? And 75% said, we don't really know much about these technologies. At the end of the event, we said, how big of an impact is this going to have on your business? 100% agreed it would have a game-changing impact within 5 years. 80% said it would happen within 2 years, right? That's the gap that we're trying to cross. A CEO of a major company does not know very much about these. And when you finish a briefing on what's happening with these accelerating technologies, massive freak out. We've all heard about the drones delivering, Amazon trying to deliver drones. That was actually inspired by one of our projects called Matternet, where they're using drones to deliver food and medicine. We had the CEO of Michelin tires in to visit us, and he said, well, I don't know how you disrupt my business using technology. He'd never thought of drones for deliveries. And he said, well, the drones, okay, but they can only carry 2 kilos. And we said, yeah, but they're doubling every 9 months. So by the end of this year, 4 kilos. By the middle of next year, 8 kilos. And he said, okay, but we deliver 100-kilo packages. We said, great, so you strap 5 drones to 1 package. And he freaked out, right? Because he's like, holy crap. How quickly will you be able to do that? In about 18 months. And so massive disruption from these technologies on even the oldest businesses have to have, and 100% said they had urgent action items the minute they got back to the office. More important than the CEOs are actually the boards. The boards have to be aware because they have to give the CEO the cover to take risk. Second element, you cannot take a big company and turn it into one of these new animals. It's too disruptive. You leave the existing business the way it is. What you do is you take your disruptive change makers, take them to the edges, and do something disruptive off the edges of your organizations. Apple does this very well. They take a team from inside, go to the edges, keep it secret, and go attack another industry, right? Third, find the disruptive startups in your industry, and this is something you could do for your clients. Go look at the industries of your clients, find which are the disruptive startups that are operating. And if in an industry like consumer packaged goods, we found 80 disruptive startups operating in that industry today. Right? So you should be advising your clients, saying, hey, go partner with them, learn from them. And GE did this. GE looked at Quirky delivering this kind of performance and said, we can't compete with that. So they partnered with them. In fact, they found all 30 disruptive startups in their space and partnered with all 30 so they can learn from them, buy them, acquire them. In Quirky's case, they actually invested in them and put a huge investment in them. Fourth is obvious, take the data that you have and expose it. A lot of companies have incredible data that they're not able to leverage internally. Rolls-Royce now is turning into a big data company because all of the tracking coming off their engines, they're selling that back to the airlines to optimize routes and so on. This fifth one is interesting. In the world of disruptive innovation, you are either the disruptor or you're being disrupted, right? There's no middle ground anymore. And so the idea here is hire a team of smart 20-year-olds, pay them to form a company to disrupt you. Because if you're not doing it, somebody else is. And that's another service you could offer to your clients. They say, let's work with you to find a way to figure out who's disrupting you and then deal with that. Right? IDEO, the design company, did this. They realized that their methodology had been open sourced enough, they'd lost their competitive edge. They hired a team and said, go compete with us. How would you do it? And the result was a platform called OpenIDEO, which is a marketplace for design ideas. And they're learning how to juxtapose with this new breed because somebody's going to do it if you're not. And the last one is a Google X type of equivalent. Larry Page came to me a couple of years ago and said, hey, I heard good things about Brickhouse. Should we do that at Google? And I said, no, you'll just invoke the immune system the same as we had at Yahoo. Why would you want to do that? But you could do, it's important to do, but point it away from the company. Now they've added to it the moonshot thinking, right? Go do breakthrough ideas. But any one of your clients or any one of your partners should go create a lab and play with some of these disruptive technologies. And I'm sure many of you are doing that, but your clients should be doing that. Right? They should learn how to leverage these new technologies and learn how to accelerate product development or other areas. And big companies are doing some interesting things. They're not just sitting around. How many of you know Valve software? Valve is a software company out of Seattle. They've implemented an attribute that I call autonomy. They have no CEO, no reporting lines, no management teams, no middle management of any kind. They operate in a swarm, beehive type of basis. They get more revenue per employee than Microsoft. Zappos, the e-commerce company, is doing this. They're implementing what's called holacracy, or taking all this out. And we thought, okay, this works for cute Silicon Valley companies and it works for cute gaming companies, but it wouldn't work for a real operational company. Came across ING Direct, an online bank in Canada, that implemented this. No reporting lines, no CEOs, no management meetings, no management layers of any kind. right? With fiduciary obligations, regulatory requirements. And if they have an online promotion, everybody swarms to the phone banks. When it's regulatory reporting time, everybody swarms to those systems. A normal bank in Canada handles about 10,000 in deposits per employee. They were able to handle 40,000 in deposits per employee just from doing that one thing. Right? Amazing that you can do that. Amazon has an interesting thing. They have what's called the institutional yes. It's so easy in a big company to say no that most ideas get stopped, right? And you know this when suggesting ideas to your clients. Most of them go, no, that's too crazy. Amazon's Jeff Bezos and Werner Vogels have implemented an idea that says if you have somebody comes to you with an idea, one of your team, your default answer has to be yes. If you want to say no, you have to write a 2-page thesis about why it's a bad idea and post it publicly inside the company, right? And so they've created a friction to saying no, right? And one of the results, Amazon Web Services. Nobody could figure out a reason to say no to that idea. And here it is, one of the biggest and most important lines of business in the world. Google has taken the OKR methodology a whole step further and made it fully transparent. So the objectives and results of a team or an individual, both historically and future, are fully available to anybody else in the company. That's an extraordinary amount of courage to do that. And I won't go through the last couple, but Hershey's is a chocolate company. Their tagline is now, "We are the knowledge company." That's their new tagline, right? That's a kind of a different world. So that's what's happening, because one thing for sure, this rate of change is not slowing down, right? If that was a true exponential, it would be a flat curve, but it's actually tilting upwards. 10 years ago, we had maybe 400 million connected devices on the internet. Today, we're up to 9 billion connected devices on the internet. By the end of this decade, it'll be 50 billion, and shortly thereafter, we're going to get to 1 trillion. Okay? So think of just that one metric, going from 9 billion today to 1 trillion in another decade and a half or so. We think we're 30, 40 years into the information revolution. On this metric, we're 1%. We're literally just starting. And I think we're going to see the biggest shift in how we manage ourselves as society and the biggest shift in how we manage ourselves as organizations that we've ever seen in our entire lives, in our entire careers. So it's going to be an interesting couple of decades. We're going to go from 1.2 billion people in 2010 to 5 billion people online in the next 5 or 6 years. And they're all going to have one of these. This is the new Indian Akash tablet. It's a 1 gig Android Wi-Fi tablet, camera, and it's a phone. It's $35. And it's dropping in price 50% a year, right? In a few years, we'll be giving these out in cereal boxes because you won't be able to sell anything to those 5 billion people if they don't have one of these. And so this 5 billion people, this will be 3 billion new minds online. The biggest marketplace that we've ever seen in business history is coming online in the next few years. That's maybe the biggest business opportunity, the biggest money-making opportunity in the history of the world. And who will capitalize on it? Right? So, muito obrigado.